From WBRN Radio in Boston on the Boston Red Network. This is a special edition or a special episode from us. The title is Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury, a review. What we are doing here is a number of things. We look at Michael Wolff's book as a real-time history of the J.D. Trump administration. Now, many of the things, I would say 70%, 80%, have been in the press. Various reports, either for the Washington Post, the Times, BuzzFeed, and you name it, and many others out there, the Hollywood Reporter and Variety, all kinds of publications there that you can think of, Politico, you basically name it, have been out there, and we've talked about it here on a Boston Red. So what we're doing here is we're looking at it from several sources. We're falling back on the Hollywood Reporter, on the New York Times, on a Variety. There's even a Fox News story here that we're looking at, and the latest from DJ Trump. So we're putting this into roughly 20 to 30 minutes, pretty concise. Now, if you go to the Boston Red Facebook page, we have the documentation up there, and on our Twitter feeds, it'll be there also. And one or two of these articles we will impinge on some of our outlets here, so you can do a perusal of those. But let's first move to the author, Michael Wolff. And Mr. Wolff has been around for a very long time. The question here is, has he ever interviewed DJ Trump? The answer to that is yes. In the Hollywood Reporter, on the first day of June 2016, the title here is Donald Trump's Conversation Politics. Dark Heart is having the best time anyone ever had. It was his title here. This is in 2016, in June of 2016. And this is electoral time at his home in Beverly Hills. The candidate talks Murdoch what he is reading, how he'll redo electoral math, and Art Emanuel's offered to script the convention. A long day is in for DJ Trump. He's having his Haagen-Dazs ice cream. He's setting for a late night chat at a Beverly Hills, or at his Beverly Hills house. There's a colonial mansion there across from the Beverly Hills Hotel. Here for the final presidential debate in California. A coronation of sorts after rallies down in Orange County. We'll skip on some of this. You can look at it. You've had a fundraiser in Brentwood. That's the area of Los Angeles where O.J. Simpson, the national hero, used to live. Tom Brackett, the investor and former Miramax co-owner, that's one of his chums that goes back with Trump for a very, very long time. Period. His extremely satisfaction rubs off. He's a New Yorker who actually might be more at home in California. In fact, he says he usually comes to his home here, two buildings on Rodeo Drive once a year. Life is sunny. Trump is optimistic. The California primary was on June the 7th of 2016. And his son-in-law has the New York Observer. You'll hear much in this book about Jared Kushner and the Bannon, Steve Bannon. His name for Ivanka Trump is Javanka. Anyway, and what it boils down to, we'll skip around a little bit here for brevity, is Henry Kissinger, Dr. Henry Kissinger, a famous diplomat's been around for a very, very long time, since Tricky Dick Nixon. His summation of these machinations in the White House, it's a battle between the Jews and the non-Jews, which is true. Kushner obviously being an Orthodox Jew, Ivanka Trump converting to it, and various other Jewish personalities running around this White House. And at that time, you had Steve Bannon. Now, this interview obviously is prior to that. He had not been elected as of that yet. We're a little ahead about ourselves, but we thought we'd get this to set this up with Mr. Wolff. Anyway, nonetheless, the conflicts between them, it's not on religion. Very interesting situation there also, because of Bannon and his right-wing associates at alt-right, that is the Breitbart franchise that he runs. He's now back there again. But nonetheless, this is what he ran, and they were supporters of the Zionist state. We say, well, why are they supporters of the Zionist state? Because in the Zionist state, you have an ultra-reactionary, fascistic regime under Bibi Netanyahu there. So in other words, there's no difference. This is what people have to understand when they talk about these people. Now, there are other Jewish people there that are more moderate, I should say, Cohen for one, and several others. But remember, one of the things there, when you start talking about the various religious things, Bannon and Spicer, they were devoted Catholics. But they all believe in one thing. That is capitalism. They're all pro-capitalism. The Zionists are pro-capitalism. So this is one of the things that you have to remember, the thread going throughout this book. And Trump goes on to talk about his $50 million he spent on the campaign. I spent $50 million of my own money to go through the primaries. Other people spent $230 million there, but Trump got his back. That's part of the thing from the book. If on stage he calls people names, and more privately he's has only good, embracing things to say about almost everyone. For most public people, I know he is the opposite. He loves everybody. Well, no doubt about that. I can say that from dealing with DJ Trump. He is an optimistic person by the very nature, period. And going on here, the recording of the PR person alleged to be Trump sounding like a PR person. It doesn't sound like me. Kimmel, anyway, I'm not sure if this is part of a dialogue here. The effect is not only damaging, it is a fun-loving comment. He's talking about Jimmy Kimmel, the comic on ABC, on Rupert Murdoch's a tremendous guy. Well, DJ Trump would say this about everyone. He's a tremendous guy on Sumner Redstone. He's a good run, so forth and so on. I think the old fool is now senile. But anyway, The Apprentice, he goes into that. He talks about Roger Ailes. And The Apprentice series, incidentally, was dying, period. His frequent media and now political confidence, the CEO, Art Emanuel, who's a brother. Now, Art Emanuel is the brother of the reactionary mayor of Chicago, Ralph Emanuel. So this is basically about that. Trump turned 70 on June 14th. DJ Trump is now 71, heading towards 72 very, very quickly there. But his speeches are cast as typical Republican speeches. I think we're about to finish up. This was the June installment during the California primaries by Michael Wolff. Now we go to the Hollywood Reporter here. You can make, you can't make this S up. My year inside the Trump insane White House. Now he put this out on the fourth day of January. And this is a prelude to his book being published by Henry Holt. We just read the book, and period. So he responds, losing interest. I've heard a lot of people want to write books. He added, clearly not understanding why anybody would. Do you know Ed Klein, an author of several virtually anti-Hillary books. Well, I don't know him, but anyway, there's all kinds of book writers out there, and Wolff goes on to evidently he sort of just hung around there, sort of quasi-embedded. He talks about the women in the Trump uniform of short skirts, high boots, long and loose hair, as well as in situation comedy parody of all the new stars of the show, the Bannon, this Kellyanne Conway, Regis Phillips no longer there, Spicer, and we've already mentioned him, Gary Cohen, Michael Flynn, he's no longer there. But many of these people have bit the dust. This H.R. McMaster, in the book he talks about H.R. McMaster. Incidentally, H.R. McMaster was the assistant to the former CIA head, and in Afghanistan also Petraeus. Petraeus left in disgrace by giving classified information to his mistress. But nonetheless, he is very, as they say in the colloquial, tight with H.R. McMaster's. Trump in the book says the first time he met McMaster as a general, he was in a full uniform with Bronze Star and all that. He wasn't very impressed by him. He was given the quote-unquote, and then he reemerged in a suit. He called it a sloppy suit. He looked like basically a used car salesman or something to that effect. Anyway, nonetheless, he didn't like McMaster. This whole machination around Afghanistan, we go into foreign policy. They had been in Afghanistan for 16 years. Barack Obama had Afghanistan. What does he do with it? Well, the military people are saying, DJ Trump, if you leave, that'll be a loss on you. In other words, you've lost another war. They've already lost a war. 16 years they lost the war. They lost the Baghdad War. They lost the Vietnam War. And then there's a whole string of wars and conflicts they've lost. They're bogged down in the Mideast because of this Zionist controversy. Now, if Trump wants to be, quote-unquote, an isolationist, that is pre-Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson, of course, and Wilsonian foreign policy, that's the same foreign policy Barack Obama was stuck with, and Hillary Clinton as being the practitioner with Hillary Monster Clinton. So you're seeing all of these things interwound there, and with Trump wanting to leave that foreign policy because he sees it literally as a drain on his budget, period. But they convince him to stick around, maybe send a few extra troops, and not shut the whole thing down. Eric Prince has his mercenary types there, and if they shut it down, they shut it down. But as far as McMaster's, there's one contingent there. Now, this goes back to Henry Kissinger's brilliant description. The Bannon people and his cronies versus, quote-unquote, the Jews. Anyway, the whole thing is here that the Kushner faction had a more moderate view towards many, many events in the world. Van Bannon being the isolationist and nationalist. Many of these characters have talked about nationalism. Now, this is a very interesting point here. What happens to Bert Bard? What happens to Bannon? And let me just finish this up, and we'll get more to him. But anyway, the personalities there, many of them are gone. Spicer was kicked out. Priebus was kicked out. Kellyanne Hillbilly Conway is still there. And let's see. Pence is there. He's vice president. Michael Flynn, he was fired. These people, there's a long list in the book of people that were fired or vanished from Trump's. That has been Trump's scenario, period. And there's mentioning of other people that are marginalized white. We won't spend any time on her. The son, dummy Trump, there, and the daughter. The problem here is, and this is the part of the book, but it's been out there by other people, not just Mr. Wolff, that the Kushners, the family, the Jared Kushner, the Ivanka Kushner, are all being looked at with jaundiced eyes by various federal people. The federal prosecutor, the FCC is looking at some visas from this Kushner company. So there's a lot of machinations surrounding them. Usually what happens is, like rings in a tree, the special prosecutor will more than likely pick off dummy Trump, that's Junior, Erica, anyway, those fools, firstly. And perhaps even Ivanka Trump. They could be indicted by a federal grand jury, and we know who is on federal grand juries in D.C., followers of O.J. Simpson. Remember that word, the same people that elected Wimpy Jones down in Alabama. So this is a whole realignment here politically around this book. Now, is this just, say, a gossip book? Well, the situation now, many outlets now dealing in gossip. That used to be the exclusive territory of the National Enquirer. And then there was, what was his name? I don't remember him right now. But anyway, he used to have his online thing. I guess he's been upstaged by these other characters. Perhaps I'll think of him. Anyway, he was around when OJ was around, and his site was at that time a popular destination. And, of course, you had all these characters on Fox News and elsewhere. The gossip columnists. The Hollywood Reporter is nothing but a gossip thing. So you'd have to understand where Mr. Wolff is coming from there, out of the gossip thing. But this is the now everybody's in the gossip. Even the New York Times, the Washington Post, which some people call the Amazon Post. Doesn't matter. They're into the gossip of the day. That is a lot of what happens in Washington around the quote-unquote cocktail circuit. But DJ Trump is on the Haagen-Dazs circuit. So in other words, a totally different situation there with DJ Trump. He's a teetotaler, doesn't drink, so he can't be around the those particular situations. In the book, they talk about his aide. What was her name? I should have written these names down. But anyway, Hope Hicks. Hope Hicks is a young woman, in her mid-20s, 26, 27, whatever, that fell into the Trump campaign from an ad agency that handled accounts, basically a New York ad agency where she'd interned and worked there. Then she went on to work for someone else. But they had people like Harvey Weinstein. So you kind of see and some of the Hillary Monster Clinton types around there, they represented them. A Democratic place. So you start seeing these cross sections. But Hope Hicks seems to be Trump's confidant. Trump evidently, one of the things Wolff said there, that he has confidence in these women, but he sees them as more dedicated to him. Well, whatever. But the whole point there is Hicks, and none of these people, she's from Connecticut, have a lot of quote-unquote political experience. And a big problem there, they were trying to get together effectively a statement. And they had this other character, what's this right-winger's name? Anyway, another right-winger there. You don't hear as much of him. But the line was there that none of these people literally had the facility to do a statement. Hicks tried to do what she could do of it. And then they had to go. They didn't even have a quote-unquote a speechwriter. They have about 40 people in their communications shop there at the White House. But Trump has sectioned things off. So he and Hicks are in the corner there trying to get this statement out on what they're going to do, the talking points for Afghanistan. Well, Afghanistan has been sort of put aside now that we move to the current 2018 scenario. Don't hear very much about Afghanistan, but it's there. New foreign policy situation now, and this has been quite common amongst presidents of the last 30, 40 years. You go back to Tricky Dick Nixon. What was Tricky Dick's big accomplishment? It wasn't domestic. It was opening the door to China. Jimmy Carter played more in the domestic scene there. He was stung by the so-called American tech hostage in Iran, which ABC, because at that time you didn't have cable TV in 1976, the late 70s. So you had ABC, NBC, etc., playing a very large role. And to ordinary people, they felt they were being held hostage. The problem was, how in the hell could they be held hostage in a country like Iran, a very small country at that? They weren't. Embassy tech over there. They were, but all kinds of characters involved there. One of the leaders, or the spokesman, turned out to be a CIA type, because a lot of these people were trained in the U.S., or at least educated in the U.S. So anyway, that moves forward, and then you go to Reagan. Reagan opening the door, which culminated in the implosion of the USSR, the Soviet Union, with Gorbachev. Of course, Gorbachev's still around. Reagan is dead. But the whole point is, he made his mark, quote unquote, more in foreign policy. Yes, he did have a tax cut, but he had a smaller economy there. He also almost had a depression, had a severe recession with Reagan in his first term. So then you move forward to G.W. Bush. G.W. Bush, of course, was, or the first, let me be before G.W., H.W. Herbert Walker Bush, the first Bush, went into Iraq, and because of the Kuwait situation, stopped at Baghdad, moved out of there, left the war as is there, so that was his accomplishment there. So again, he was in foreign policy, and that had some effects on the economy. It stimulated the economy, and then, of course, he lost the election to William Jefferson Clinton because of Ross Perot of Dallas, Texas, who declared him the winner. And again, we see foreign policy coming in there. Clinton went into these little two-bit things like Kosovo, etc. But Clinton was more of a domestic man. He delivered the knockout blow of the end of welfare as we know it, which was devastating in the African American community and with working people, poor people, period. And then came the dot-com boom to pull the economy out of literally the recession that Clinton inherited, because when he went in, it was a recession. There have been recessions in and out. Dot-com boom was the stimulus that brought manufacturing, etc. in, and then, of course, the end of Clinton's term, G.W. Bush came in, and G.W. Bush said the economy was in a recession, thus nobody bought anything in Q4 before G.W. took his little oath of office. But then came 9/11, another stimulus program, the creation of this mammoth operation called Homeland Security. And then you had billions of dollars spent on a caper. That's all we can call it, because the evidence on 9/11 has all been trucked off to China and cut into 1,000 different pieces. So we don't need to dwell on that one. But that shows you a little bit of history of foreign policy. And then, of course, that set up 2 terms of G.W. Bush. And G.W. had tax cuts also, nothing new right there. But the hallmark of G.W. Bush was a depression. The depression came, and at that time, realignments were there. Whole sectors were being nationalized. And Barack Obama was on the campaign trail and eventually was the victor in the 2008 election. But at the same time, the Republicans were running the same program while they were in power. And when they fell out of power and the Democrats were able to have the House under Nancy Pelosi. And that was at the time they should have moved for single payer. They didn't do that. But we did get Obamacare passed. The Republicans put out, and see, this was the whole thing of fake news, Lupin-Presser. This fake news operation was invented then to obstruct Barack Obama. Well, the Affordable Care Act took place, and as the late, great Jerry Pippin said, as people, and the polling bears him out, as people get to understand it, to what it actually was, they will like it. and all the machinations with the Affordable Care Act website was brought about by one, incompetence and deliberate sabotage. But we got through all of that. And then, of course, Barack Obama was reelected, period. And then you went into the next election. That election, there was a furious fight between a progressive candidate from Vermont named Bernie Sanders, and you had several others. You had the governor there of, what was he? The governor of Maryland. But he quickly fell by the wayside when they had a rebellion in Baltimore. So we didn't hear anything of him. He sort of disappeared. So Bernie Sanders becomes a major opponent there, and the Republicans had a field of 16 or more out there, which Uncle Carl Rove said the strongest field they've ever had. We saw it at Cranston Analytics as the weakest field they've ever had. So DJ Trump prevailed. He knocked him out, sort of like Joe Louis. He had a sucker week in the primaries, and he ended up being the nominee of the Republican Party. And they tried various things on him. The tape came out there. What was that thing called? Anyway, with Billy Bush. Never heard of Billy Bush, but no doubt he was part of the Bush clan. So that thing upset the apple cart there for a while. But our polling showed DJ Trump was not in any particular trouble. He went down 1 or 2 points, but at no time, and we emphasized this several times, after the Republican convention on any of our models, and we have 2, did DJ Trump ever fall behind Hillary the Monster Clinton. Now, on our second one, it's very, very close there. There was an instance where they were 1 or 2 points ahead, but we always had DJ Trump ahead. Now, in the book, Mr. Wolff talks about the Trump campaign. This is before the election, but no one there believed that it could happen. Bannon alluded to it, but DJ Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, a third-rate poster, but they had their analytics shop in San Antonio, Texas. That's a different situation there. And then the Mercers upped that. They had very good analytics. There was no problem about that. There was rumors of the Monsters analytics shop, but it was second-rate at best. It was not a very good shop under Monk. Monk was not a very good campaign type there. He didn't understand the big picture while Bill Clinton tried to explain it to him, but that group of people were closed-minded. Now, they accused Trump of being closed-minded there, not reading, not listening, etc. But that was the same problem the Monster had. Now, the Monster, a little bit different take there. We go back to Donna Brazile. We reviewed Donna Brazile's book. Basically, some of the same kinds of machinations are coming out here with the Trump people. So we go through the campaign, and then we understand after the campaign, Trump's supposed big victory. Now, people tell me, well, Michael Moore and many others have said that. There's no doubt about it. There were people out there that predicted that DJ Trump would win, some based on analytics, some based on their intuitive thinking, or perhaps intuitive/analytical thinking, who knows. But nonetheless, there were those people out there. But the general consensus, talking to ordinary people, and of course with the posters, you could go with Nate Silver. They do the averaging at Real Clear Politics, that the Monster was ahead in every state that she needed to win. But as we know, it all boils around a lot of turnout there. And when you have the type of election she had, it was very, very dicey from the very beginning. The Monster was Sorby-Amby to begin with. Well, so was Trump. So in other words, it equaled out. You could have Access Hollywood there. But the problem with these so-called scandals, they're usually good for a few days and forgotten about. Trump fought back and basically neutralized the people there, but he'd had a history. And this was the reason that the Republican Party decided that they would go with Trump's stream of consciousness campaign. Very hard to defense against as long as it's working. And even if it falls off the rails, as it did with the Hollywood Access, you just throw it back on and just keep stepping. And that's basically what he did. He just kept boom, boom, boom. Although the people around him, including Kellyanne Conway and the others, felt, well, even Trump, we'll lose this. And then Trump figured, well, it's $1 billion buy out there. And Roger Ailes was thinking that, well, okay, we'll bring him in. And while we're reviewing this, but he also felt that Trump would lose, but they get a new network. That was when he had been exiled from Fox News, that he could get the money together along with Trump and various other people, and they would have a third conservative network along with Breitbart. Breitbart, the problem they had there, I think 1.5 million people around it, was not enough to monetize it. Now, understand that we hear a lot of that in internet radio / podcasting to monetize your broadcast. Well, when you start talking about 1 million people and you can't quite, now we're also talking about a broadcast network, not some thing on a serious station. You can't monetize it properly. Well, the monetization of it obviously is the advertisers that you get that monetizes everything. So anyway, enough talking about that, but that is part of what Mr. Wolff was talking about there. We covered the Trump kids, the dummies. That's a big part of it. We talked about Bannon being himself there, Irish Catholic. Role models for him were people like Thomas P. Tip O'Neill. He was an Irishman, no doubt about it. The old typical Irish type of politician. All things are local. He even goes back to the speaker that was during LBJ's time, McCormick. McCormick stuck around for so long, but he didn't know where he was some of the days. He was sleeping. But anyway, old man McCormick was around there. And LBJ, how LBJ cajoled people and got legislation passed. But one of the things that evidently Bannon and his little pinhead never thought about, LBJ was a uniter, not a divider. Period. Totally different situation. What Bannon was trying to go back to was to Strom Thurmond and Wheelchair Wallace and find those disaffected people, but to modernize his pitch. In other words, the old sheeted clans were still around, but very, very little. They had moved to even past the skinheads. We don't hear much of them nowadays. But the new types, neo-fascist movements, a modernization of what Schickengruber did in Germany, literally. So it appeals to the 30-somethings. We saw that in the latest situation reported last night. 26-year-old out of the St. Louis area that tried to commandeer an Amtrak train. And he went also to the alt-right fest down in Charlottesville, Virginia, where they killed Heather Heyer. So this is the backdrop of Steve Bannon and his alt-right organization. Now we move forward on Bannon. He's been excised, extracted from the White House, disgraced. Trump comes out here, said Bannon literally cried begging for his job back, no doubt. But the job will not reappear. Now that Bannon's fallen out of grace, Trump said he lost his mind, probably did, and went back to drink. But the whole situation there is that now his right-wing cronies, like Kill Cloud or whatever her name is, out of where's that moron out of Arizona. She's running for Jeff Flick's seat. And she said, well, I have many supporters besides Bannon. Well, the word's out on Bannon, but he's saw Miambi too. Nobody wants him. The hardcore Breitbart followers, the neo-Nazis, will be there. But how does this affect the Spencers, the Ann Coulters? You have to understand, these people were always marginalized. They were built up by Ailes, but Ailes is gone now. And the Murdochs that are running the thing now, are the sons, the old man is still around, but he's 85 or so, are much more moderate. So their days are numbered. These clowns will move back into their trailer parks where they belong. It's an interesting quote there that Mr. Wolff brings out, but DJ Trump was talking to someone, and he said, well, he was comparing the real estate situation in New York. In New York, you have him, and you have the Jewish people, which have that, and they have entertainment, etc., according to DJ Trump, and he would know. But he said, well, we are poor white trash. The difference in the other poor white trash is that they are poor and we have money. And it basically kind of sums it up, what it is all about there. Mr. Wolff, this is his. The men and women of the West Wing, for all the media was ridiculing them, they actually felt they had a responsibility to accompany Trump, and one of his senior Republicans turned selfie careers into patriots. Their job was to maintain the pretense of relative sanity, even as each individual came into the conclusion that in generous terms it was insane to think that you could run a White House with experienced organization and real purpose. Well, they were able to do it because there wasn't very much to be done. And she's also, on March 30th, after the collapse of the health care bill, 32-year-old Katie Walsh, she was the deputy chief of staff, the effective administrative chief of the West Wing. She was one of these true believers, but she's long gone also, that she actually felt that they would win the health care bill and be able to vanish Obamacare. There was Priebus, a mainstream Republican, and there was Bannon, who's a reasonable claim to be one person actually representing Trumpism. So infuriated Trump that Bannon was hopelessly sidelined. By April, how much influence do you think Steve Bannon has over me? Trump said 000. Well, part of the problem there was it all goes back to the campaign, the stream of consciousness. Now, he doesn't talk about that, but we will in this review. The stream of consciousness model, it won the election for them because of malpractice by Hillary and Monster Clinton. But to win an election is one thing, to run a country is a different situation. And the objectives you have to look at. The Affordable Care Act, that collapse was would have been to Big Pharma and the Libertarian Republicans that wanted to further privatize the healthcare system more than it is now. But it would have been ruinous to part of the healthcare system. You would have had collapse, and you are having collapse of rural hospitals, community health clinics, etc. So in other words, the 1/6 of economy the Republicans like to talk about would start to lose numbers. They actually gain numbers under Obamacare. They can't dispute that. Those numbers are out there. So this was a situation. The other big item there was what to do about James Comey. James Comey, Trump was going to fire him, not fire him, etc. But he got jealous of Comey. He called Comey effectively a movie star, media man, loved to be behind the microphone, etc. Well, he did fire him. The Jared Kushner, Ivanka faction did not want him fired. First of all, they knew that that would bring further scrutiny to them, which it has, onto Mr. Mueller. So the whole idea is the FBI and some of those people are against us. the other part here, like a child, but that's been out there before. People talk about DJ Trump as being childish. And as far as Spicer, when he was expelled, they had the Mooch, Anthony Scaramucci. It was brought in there. Scaramucci, what they call a minor figure in the New York financial world. Had overnight been Kushner and Ivanka's solution to the White House management and messaging problem. So they hired us the Mooch, who hung around there as he knew their world. In effect, the couple had hired him as preposterous hired in the annals of the West Wing to replace and take over basically running the White House. There was, after the abrupt Scaramucci, the Mooch's meltdown, hardly in effect inside the White House, period. Rex Tillerson was still there. He's mentioned in this thing. Trump has threatened to fire everyone. That's not unusual. At various times. And we already talked about Gary Cohn, Dina Powell. We haven't talked about her. Rick Newborn, all those people are on their way out. They're gone. Gary Cohn is still there. And then came Kelly, the former Marine general, been around for 40 years, never won a war. So this is kind of the situation here. This is Mr. Wolff's article in the Hollywood Reporter on the 4th of January. We hadn't missed anything. All right. So we'll get back here. Let's get the Fox News thing to cement all this together. President Trump took to Twitter on a Friday evening to take shots at Fire and Fury. Trump recreated a parody cover of the book, like the Republican Party had retweeted earlier, using it as a springboard for his latest criticism, calling Wolff a total loser. And he said that before for different people, saying Bannon cried when he got fired and has been dumped like a dog by almost everyone since then. Yeah, we alluded to that. And the parody, liar and phony, surrounded a photo of Wolff with barbs from actual reviews of the much criticized expose. He gets basic details wrong. The New York Times writer said. Now, we'll go to their review. It doesn't say that. Real factual errors makes you wonder what the overall content is, as from a CNN reporter that's not named. And he goes on to say, this is more Trump. Wolff is a total loser who makes up stories in order to sell his really boring and untruthful books. He uses sloppy Steve Bannon, who cried when he got fired and begged for his job. That's a quote there. And then he goes on this total loser thing. He's been retweeting that. Trump also targeted Bannon, who's trash talking the president and his family, had sparked the media frenzy surrounding the book's release. Well, we're here, and the book's release, of course, was released on Friday, was moved up from its original date on the 9th. Trump sent out a demand, a cease and desist demand, and no one paid any attention. Wolff fired back on Friday during an interview with NBC. You'll hear from Wolff when we leave, insisting that he did speak to the president and whether he realized it was an interview or not. Of course, we just talked about the 2016 situation. Sarah Huckabee Sanders dismissed the book as a tabloid gossip. Well, the whole White House has been a tabloid, so nothing is new there. Wolff wrote the book in over 18 months, which is, he claimed he spoke to 200 people. No doubt he probably did. The rumor mill is out there, and it moves on. Let me just see if we can get to the Times article. Oops. 15 of the wildest claims. This is from Variety. We put this up hit the newsstands. Finally, Henry Holt moved up the publishing date. No doubt it's a big one there. One in the midst of Bannon's feud with Jared Kushner. We covered this, presumably addressed to Wolff about a Financial Times story on somebody called Felix Salter. Salter was prosecuted by Andrew Weissman, a lawyer now working with the Special Prosecutor's Office. You got LeBar James, a money laundering investigation on you. Anyway, Javanka, you got it so tight. I'm not sure what this is all about. During the second monologue, Bannon infuses that he gained power against his enemies. That's a Trump thing. He writes that Gary Cohn, once a killer enemy, was now desperate to be named Fed chairman. Well, he didn't get it anyway. And he goes on, current favor with Bannon, licking my balls, he said here. And three, upsetting, his upsetting paragraph doesn't need much content. Trump likes to say that one of the things that makes his life worth living was getting your friends' wives into bed. We won't spend any time on that one. And putting on a speakerphone. 4, Sean Hannity, vapor, which we know because he was drawing deep on his electronic cigarette. And ranting and raving that DJ Trump never called Roger Ailes' widow. Steve Bannon called Ivanka Trump a lying liar about her Russian ties in front of her father. Ivanka complained. The president responded, "I told you this is a tough town, baby. Tough town." 6, according to Wolff, at the time that the Washington Post obtained shots of nude photos as of Melania Trump had done as a model. Insiders assumed that the leak came from old DJ Trump himself. Second, Bannon liked to call Trump's campaign the broken whatever campaign. Anyway, 8, Trump hated his own inaugural. No doubt, because he didn't have millions of people there. Number 9, when Bannon managed to push Trump to withdraw from the Paris climate agreement, he took it as a personal victory against Ivanka Trump. Score, he said, the bitch is dead. 10, Trump privately called a deputy Attorney General Sally Gates, whatever, we won't even mention it. We did last night. He added that Gates is only famous because of me. Everything revolved around him anyway, including Gates, I guess. Reading between the lines, it seemed as if Wolff never got Ivanka Trump to trust him enough for a direct conversation. He still feels confident enough to assert that Ivanka got her father to bomb Syria. He does talk about Syria there, and there's a situation where Trump saw these pictures of kids foaming at the mouth from the poison, and that's why he did the Syrian thing. Although all the aircraft were removed from that base, which was effectively, it was a Syrian base, but it was occupied by the Russians. But the whole area was, did President Assad's forces actually bomb those people, or was that bombed by other people? The evidence is that it was not President Assad that did the bombing, that it was other parties there aligned with those groups sponsored by the CIA. He liked big names. He liked big pictures. He liked literal big pictures. He liked impact. Trump, who is very fond of his personal publicist, now this is Hope Hicks here, told her that she was the best. Oh boy, he's talking about this, and there's an article I read in The Hill by this Corey Lewinsky. But the best woman he'd ever had, evidently. They evidently had this Corey Ludansky had a big argument with her in front of the White House. He prompted Hicks to run out of the room. The president has a lot of weird feelings about Jared Kushner being Jewish, for Trump giving Israel to Kushner was not only a test, it is a Jewish test. The president said, signaling him out for being Jewish and rewarding him for being Jewish and saddling him with an impossible hurdle for being Jewish, and defaulting to the stereotype belief in the negotiating powers of Jews. Henry Kissinger, Dr. Kushner said, Jared is going to be the new Henry Kissinger. Trump said more than once, rather than combining compliment and slur. Number 14, he eats at McDonald's because psychologically he's afraid of being poisoned. He could be poisoned at McDonald's. Ivanka Trump used to discuss her stepmother's intellect with the sentiment, all you need to know about Milana is that she thinks if he runs, he'll certainly win. Well, Milana was correct here, but there's other parts of the book that Milana actually thought it would be terrible for her because she is a quote-unquote private person. So we pretty much touched on the areas here of Mr. Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, and it has created a lot of fire, a lot of fury out here in the regular America. But these kinds of books do. He'll sell a ton of them, no doubt about it, and people will be talking about it because it's written as a story. It's sort of like the O.J. Book. When it came out, people ran out and got it. That was old Dominic Dunn. Of course, old Dominic Dunn is dead now, fortunately. But he was, again, one of these guys was around. He was at Vanity Fair. I didn't check what Vanity Fair had to say, but nonetheless, generally it's laid out. Wolff laid it out in the Hollywood Reporter in 2016. That he actually interviewed him with his Haagen-Dazs ice cream, DJ Trump. They knew he had a house in Hollywood, but anyway, he's got one there. But this whole thing is of Trump. It's a careful pattern of Trump praising everyone. Remember, he had Rocket Man. Then he demoted Rocket Man to Little Rocket Man. And now we talked a little about foreign policy here, but evidently Trump has decided, look, he needs a big breakthrough. He's had his tax plan. Supposedly business will fall in line with it, but unfortunately for DJ Trump, corporations basically were paying about 22%. That's the nominal rate after although it was at 35, 36. They were only paying about 22 if they paid anything. Now they'll pay 21, which means they will even pay less. Now, up front, some are taking tax hits, but that's more of a ledger problem, we'll say. Spreadsheet these days. Anyway, that is basically what that is. Now, job numbers have fallen down. They have 145 or so thousand jobs. This is the same situation that he decried Barack Obama for having a sluggish economy under 3%. But the problem in a modern capitalist economy, you cannot sustain 3.5% growth. Not in this economy, how it's set up. China has fallen back, to 7%. They were 8, 9%. It just means as the economy becomes more global. Incidentally, we'll have numbers man here on WBRN Boston Red Network. We'll talk more about this of jobs. And what we can say is most of the models out there, majority of them, not the one Corey Lewandowski was using in his Hill article, but say that the type of trickle-down deal, the Republicans have been running this forever, back to Arthur Laffer, just simply will not work. But we'll, we'll look at Q4, but we like to look at several quarters, at least several weeks to several months to get a pattern. Now, we have a model called the seesaw model. So in other words, the number of jobs created can go up, can go down, and we look at different sectors. Now, right now, energy is up, and as energy is up, as we explained last night, 70% of this economy, the American economy, is consumers. And if their discretionary income becomes less, there are problems. You can talk about the $80,000 couple, that's 4 people in a family, getting back $2,000 or even $4,000. Standard deduction has been double. But that doesn't mean too much if they end up spending more of their discretionary income, and also at the same time they're not getting the incremental wage increases, their compensation. And in fact, if the jobs rate tightens up, the Fed expects to come with 2 rate changes. Now, as long as the economy is running as it's running, low unemployment, inflation will rise. There's been inflation now, and they don't put in the inflation numbers gas and food. Gas and food have both been rising, and those are the things that ordinary people buy. Because what happens there, even if you're using the T as we do, you will pay more for that because of the various gas or diesel or whatever mixture that the buses are using. Workers do get raises, etc. So in other words, all those things tend to factor in. So if the economy does stumble, and a good time usually we in Q1 right now, we get in Q2, the summer months are usually a little bit lackluster. From January to March, and then Q2, and getting Q2 this summer, usually retooling thing. I won't go that much. I'm spending too much time on it. But all this revolves around the various machinations there. So how does Mr. Rocket Man, or Little Rocket Man, play in? Well, if Trump is trying to get a dialogue, he's already claiming credit for the phone being activated between the Republic of Korea and the Democratic Republic of Korea. And if there's any kind of negotiated break there, he will claim that. And that's where American presidents shine, is in foreign policy. So if he can get a deal there, he's got a deal there. Barack Obama, it was elusive. So then he has to move to the Mideast. That's when he cranks up the Jared, providing Jared's not in jail by then, or whomever. He can probably bring Henry Kissinger in and get a settlement in the Mideast. They came very close to that. It's just a situation of bringing in the Palestinians. If the Palestinians could agree, then they made a stupid step of wanting to move the capital to Jerusalem. It should be in Tel Aviv. It was crazy. But then there are other issues out there, the environment, and he doesn't really talk that much about the environment, but that's all part and parcel of the disgraced Steve Bannon, otherwise known as Sloppy or Crybaby Bannon. I think that's what we'll start calling him. So Crybaby Bannon is the one that brought that about, and they're using it because it serves the purposes of monopoly capitalists. Let's do the sports here. We ran a little bit over, but we can afford to do that. And we'll get Mr. Wolff in the last party. Hopefully, we'll have time for Mr. Wolff as we move along. So I think we've done a pretty good job of highlighting the book, and we moved from several sources, from Fox News to the Hollywood Reporter, where Mr. Wolff was a scribe there, and a setup article that he in fact did know, had interviewed DJ Trump in the past. And that's very important when you start talking about that and his at the White House. And of course, in Washington, you could just hang around literally the bars and saloons. You would not have to be anywhere other than there to find out what is going on. So it's not a situation where you could hear rumors, and then it's a matter of verifying some of the rumors. But a lot of these rumors came out in various publications, from the Post to the Times to BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed was very spectacular there, and you name it. So if you were just doing that, you could write a book on DJ Trump from secondary sources that have went to the real source. It's all there. The Warriors were at the Clippers in Los Angeles. Warriors won 21 to 105 for the Clippers. The Celtics were in New York. Celtics 87 to 85 over the Nets of Brooklyn. The Rockets were in the Motor City. Pistons 108 to 101. The Bulls were at the Pacers, Indiana, and wish they would have stayed in Chicago. Pacers 125 to 86. The Cavaliers were at the Magic. Cavaliers 131 to 127. The Bucks were in Washington. The Bucks 110 to 103. The Pelicans were at the T-Wolves in the cold, no doubt. 116 T-Wolves to 98 for the Pelicans. They wish they would have stayed in the Big Easy. The Nuggets and Kings. Kings 106 to the Nuggets. 94 and on to the NHL. And we're getting ready for the big game in college ball. Incidentally, we'll preview this week all about sports as our economics of sports program. The Blues were at the Flyers. Flyers 6-3 was the final score there. The Oilers were at the Stars in Dallas. Stars 5-1 over the Oilers of Edmonton. The Hurricanes were at the Bruins. Bruins in Boston. 7-1 was the final there. The Canucks and Maple Leafs. Maple Leafs 3-2 in that contest. The Canucks out of Vancouver. The Maple Leafs goes out of Toronto. Canadian teams. The Lightning and Senators. The Senators 6-3 over the Lightning. And the Rangers and Coyotes. Rangers 2-1 over the Coyotes. The Arizona Coyotes. And the New York Rangers. We'll have to get these new teams going here. The Wild and Avalanche. Avalanche 7-2 in that contest. The Ducks. The Anaheim Ducks and the Flames. Flames 3-2. The Anaheim Ducks out of Southern California. And the Flames out of Calgary, Alberta. And finally, the Predators and Kings. Predators 4-3 in that contest. We love it. The Kings out of Los Angeles and the Predators out of Nashville. Who could have sensed such a thing going on? Anyway, this will do it for us. We'll see you as Numbers Man. That is from Cranston Analytics. And also, we'll have an open source report sponsored by our friends and others at Cranston Software. We'll be looking at the flaw in the Intel chip, the Apple products, and various other CPUs out there that you are utilizing. And as it's pretty schizophrenic here. As Boston Red, we'll see you on the Monday Morning Quarterback. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Published as of 9 o'clock this morning, the president's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter threatening legal action against you and the publisher, to which you say?
And they sent that yesterday before they actually had read the book. But actually what I say is where do I send the box of chocolates?
You think he's helping you sell books?
Absolutely. I mean, and not only is he helping me sell books, but he's helping me prove the point of the book. I mean, this is extraordinary that a president of the United States would try to stop the publication of a book. This doesn't happen, has not happened from other presidents, would not even happen from a CEO of a mid-sized company.
Well, the president, obviously, as you know, tweeted about you last night. He says, I authorized zero access to the White House, actually turned you down many times, said he never spoke to you for the book. It's full of lies, misrepresentations, and sources that don't exist. So as good a place to start as any. Did you talk to the president?
What was I doing there if he didn't want me to be there?
Well, let me ask you, did you talk to the president? Did you interview him for this book?
I absolutely spoke to the president. Whether he realized it was an interview or not, I don't know, but it certainly was not off the record.
And you spoke to him at the White House after he was sworn in?
I spoke to him after the inauguration, yes. And I had spoken to, I've spent about 3 hours with the president over the course of the campaign in the White House. So my window into Donald Trump is pretty significant. But even more to the point, and this was really sort of the point of the book, I spoke to people who spoke to the president on a daily sometimes minute-by-minute basis. So this book was really, I mean, in a sense, there was one question on my mind when I began this book. What is it like to work with Donald Trump? How can you work with Donald Trump? And what is the, how do you feel having worked with Donald Trump?
And I want to get to the substance, what you've written in the book in a moment, but just to clear this up, because the president is saying it's full of lies, that you didn't have the access you said you had.
You know, I think one of the things we have to count on is that Donald Trump will attack, he will send lawyers letters. This is a 35-year history of how he approaches everything.
Do you have recordings of some of these interviews and some of these conversations?
Well, I work like every journalist works. So I have recordings, I have notes. I am certainly absolutely in every way comfortable with everything I've reported in this book.
Would you release any of those recordings since your credibility is being questioned?
My credibility is being questioned by a man who has less credibility than perhaps anyone who has ever walked on Earth at this point.
Before I leave it, I will say the president, the tweet alludes to, quote, your past. It says, I assume referring to a profile about you in 2004 in the New Republic. The reporter said of you, the scenes in your writing aren't recreated so much as created, springing from Wolff's imagination rather than actual knowledge of events.
I've written many books. I've written millions upon millions of words. I don't think there has ever been one correction.
So you stand by everything in the book, nothing made up?
Absolutely everything in the book.
Let's talk about the book itself, because one of the overarching themes is that, according to your reporting, everyone around the president, senior advisors, family members, every single one of them, questions his intelligence and fitness for office.
Let me put a marker in the sand here. 100% of the people around him.
Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, Ivanka Trump, question his fitness for office?
Every time and I want to be careful about who I spoke to, because the nature of this kind of book is you kind of grant everyone a veil. But having said that, certainly Jared and Ivanka, in their current situation, which is in a deep legal quagmire, are putting everything on the president. Not us, it's him.
What are some of the ways the president was described to you by those closest to him?
You know, I will tell you the one description that everyone gave, everyone has in common. They all say he is like a child. And what they mean by that is he has a need for immediate gratification. It's all about him. I mean, this letter for this cease and desist letter, I mean, I still have sources in the White House, and I know everybody was going, we should not be doing this. This is not smart. And he just insists. He just has to be satisfied in the moment. You
said that these senior people insult his intelligence. What are the kinds of things people would say?
They say he's a moron, an idiot. Actually, there's a competition to sort of get to the bottom line here of who this man is. Let's remember, this man does not read, does not listen. So he's like a it's like a pinball, just shooting off the sides.
One of the more disturbing observations you make in the book is that the president's close advisors, people around him, have noticed him repeating stories, expression for expression, you say, within a short period of time.
In a shortening period. So they've all tracked this, that it used to be, I know people would point out that in the beginning it was like every 25 or 30 minutes you would get the same 3 stories repeated. Now it's the same 3 stories in every 10 minutes.
Oh, and what's the suggestion there? Because that goes beyond saying, okay, the president's not an intellectual. I mean, what are you arguing there? You say, for example, that he was at Mar-a-Lago and didn't recognize lifelong friends.
I will quote Steve Bannon, he's lost it.
Let's talk about Steve Bannon, because here's somebody who was on the record with you, made some pretty bold assertions, as you mentioned, has disparaged the president, and yet now, in the last couple of days, says he's a great man and nothing can separate us. What's Bannon doing
well,
here?
I want to make one. I mean, the president has tried to put this. This book is about Steve Bannon. So let me say very forthrightly, this book is not about Steve Bannon. This book is about Donald Trump. As for Steve Bannon, and I spoke to Steve as I spoke to many people throughout the length of the reporting here, and really saw a transformation, not only of Steve, but of everyone. But Steve, in a way, is most vivid, or his language is the most vivid.
And
the transformation was, we thought this presidency could work. We thought Donald Trump is an interesting, unique character, and we might be able to do something here. And they saw him over that time come to the conclusion he cannot do this job.
I am out of time, but your former editor at Vanity Fair, Graydon Carter, said he wasn't surprised you'd written this explosive book. He was surprised they let